Adam Schwab, author of the book Pigs at the Trough, which was about this very issue, excessive executive remuneration, the appropriate man to discuss it. He joins me now from Melbourne. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Janine. How are you going?
Good. What did you make of this? It seems quite a strong pro-shareholders move to do this.
Well, it was foreshadowed about a year ago that the two strikes ruling, and obviously the Directors Club came out against it, and a lot of the shareholders, activists came out for it, obviously. But if you look closely, whilst it's better than nothing at all, the ramifications of the two strikes. So if you get two 25% votes against a remuneration report, what then happens is the board is spilled, and directors shareholders, I should say, can vote out the board. The one thing to note is shareholders can already vote out the board. Every year, 2 or 3 directors stand at AGMs up for election. So what the powers are given to shareholders as a result of this rule really isn't any different to what they currently have.
So you're saying it's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory because we all know how impossible it is to vote off any director.
Very right, very right, Janine. The best example of that is of course David Ryan, the former chairman of ABC's audit committee, and he's the man who was making sure ABC's numbers are correct, and of course they were a couple of $1 billion off. ASIC's still investigating that, and despite that, David was reappointed as chairman of Transurban a few months later. So if that can't get you voted off the board, you've got to wonder what on earth can. So I think directors are pretty safe, 2 strikes or not. OK,
well, let's look on the positive side from a shareholder's point of view, not from a director's point of view, but let's look at it. It is, in theory, quite a tough rule. And as you said, directors were very anti this. There's been a lot of hand-wringing and nighty ripping over it. So they won't be happy out there, and we've seen statements today, at it even being enshrined. Even if it is impossible, they don't even like this, do they?
Of course they don't, and it would be remiss of directors not to oppose something that at least ostensibly curbs some of their, I guess, powers or rights. But whilst the government seems to be trying to act on this issue, it could be very easily solved. I suggested a couple of years ago in Crikey, one way to solve the problem of I guess the non-binding nature of remuneration reports is simply if a remuneration report's voted down, or perhaps voted down twice, just withhold pay from the chairman and the head of the remuneration committee. I think you'll find that if that was to happen, if chairmen weren't getting $500,000 or $600,000 a year, suddenly they'd be speaking to shareholders a lot more frequently and ensuring they really do listen to shareholders' views rather than taking it very much at face value.
I'm assuming nobody took up that interesting suggestion, Adam.
Nobody has as yet, Janine, but I guarantee that the problem with CEO or with executive pay is one of simple agency costs, and it arises because directors don't really care what executives are paid. Ultimately, if anything, directors are better off paying executives more. It looks like they've got a better executive. What you've got to do is make directors' own interests liable if something goes wrong. So if that happens, if shareholders are aggrieved at how much executives are being paid, take away money from the people paying them.
But you see, I mean, just to play devil's advocate here, and I mean, we are a business channel, and I do have to defend some of the directors. I mean, there's a lot of onerous, in fact, there's so much corporate governance rules, there's so much liability these days, and it puts off a lot of good directors. I would have thought that you can't go too much further in what you put on them, can you? Because the problem ones are really in a minority, aren't they?
Well, it depends what you define as problem, but it's the common line of the AICD that the directors have so much liability. I took up the AICD a couple of years ago on this issue, and I called them up and said, what exactly are these rules you're talking about? What are these onerous obligations on directors? And I spoke to them a couple of times, and they came back with a couple of instances of directors being held responsible. And in one case, it was an employee had died because a director hadn't been paying attention. Another case was an employee had almost died. And that were the only 2 times they'd come up with directors being held overly responsible. And in both those instances, there was something like a $10,000 fine. So these are the best the AICD can come up with. It's very much a myth that directors face all these onerous obligations, as the James Hardie case of the finding proved recently. I
was going to ask you about that because, of course, James Hardie was cited as, you know, the penalties, which I think actually were only, and I say only, but, you know, $30,000, $50,000 for the directors. But they were banned for a number of years, and, of course, that's been overturned.
It has been, and there's a lot of press criticising ASIC, and ASIC certainly didn't appear to run the case especially well, but it's another instance of a legal technicality making directors who have done the wrong thing, and there's no doubt the James Hardie directors did the wrong thing, regardless of what you read last week in the Financial Review and the Fairfax papers. The James Hardie directors were at fault. There's no doubt about that. The fact that they got away on a technicality, and the reason was that the Court of Appeal said ASIC should have called an Allens Arthur Robinson, a lawyer, to testify at the court hearing, the same lawyer that created the structure that took away money from asbestos victims. That's why ASIC lost the case. So it was a legal technicality. It wasn't necessarily a decision on the ethics or morals of the case.
No, and in fact, you're right. I mean, to be fair to the Sydney Morning Herald, Elizabeth Sexton has been following this case closely. She wrote an excellent piece making that point, that this is a case that should be taken in isolation and not given comfort. They shouldn't be dancing in the streets, that this has been overthrown. But I wonder that we don't know if the ASIC is going to appeal. Do you think we will see people like Meredith Hellicar get back onto boards? I mean, Mark McGuinness has already come back, and Meredith Hellicar has been turning up at BCA meetings and things. I mean, does she really think she can come back from that?
I think there's a very big difference between Mark McGuinness for all his failings, and there certainly were some clear failings. He was an exceptional CEO in terms of financial sense, and really turned around David Jones and built Officeworks. Whereas Hellicar's performance at James Hardie certainly wasn't as good as that, and she was a chair, not a
Sorry,
not
Adam, you're not suggesting they'll appoint people based on their track record, not being part of the club?
It's I think there's a couple of directors in the James Hardie case that were I thought unfairly blamed. A couple of the US-based directors who weren't even in the country at that infamous board meeting. I think it was in 2001. But there are others who certainly were and certainly signed off on it. So I think you need to look at the Hardie directors on a director-by-director basis, as you need to look at every director. So I think
we are trying to get a lot more female directors. Do you think Meredith Hellicar might be able to make a comeback?
I think some of the people pushing female directors need to perhaps look at the quality of the female directors, and there are no doubt some brilliant female business people out there, but I don't think you want to be pushing females because they're female and ignore perhaps past failings, because it won't help the push to even the ledger, so to speak, if you're playing favourites not based on merit.
Yes, music to my ears, that one, but we've done a lot of it this year.